For today's video, I sat down with Ben Borowski, one of the OG Notion consultants. If you've been in the Notion community for a while, you probably know him best as the co-founder of Notion Mastery, which is probably the best Notion course out there. And in this conversation, we talk about what makes Notion so special, the 3 levels of learning Notion, the big trap most companies fall into when they try to adopt Notion, and what it takes to become a true Notion master. Hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. All right, let's maybe start with this, Ben. What would you say is your 2-minute live elevator pitch?
Life for my business or for myself?
Both. Like if you meet a new person, you have 2 minutes to kind of tell them like who you are, what you do. How do you do that?
Got it. Yeah. So I usually refer to myself as an app builder or app creator. I've had many hats in my life. So I'm a creative person. I have a fine arts background, and I've done everything from mobile apps to games to software. And these days I am a Notion educator. So my partner and I run the Notion Mastery program. And yeah, we teach people how to use Notion and also how to use Notion at scale with businesses and things like that. So that's my professional side of my life. On the other side, I am a musician, artist, and a volunteer firefighter.
That's a really cool profile. Maybe if I just quickly going to the Notion educator, right? I know what Notion is, of course, but if if the person on the dinner table that you just explain what you do, if you tell them, I work with Notion, I help people understand Notion, they're like, what is Notion, right? How do you usually try to explain that?
Yeah, I typically describe it as sort of a workflow and organizational tool. Not really. I usually don't talk about productivity in this case because it's just too open-ended for this type of thing. And so I usually describe it as the type of things that allows us to manage. So Notion is first and foremost, to me, a content management system. And I used to spend maybe 10 years ago, my bread and butter at my business was building custom content management systems for companies and for websites. And now I can build these content management systems in hours, sometimes even minutes, by applying a template for a company. And sometimes these companies can even go right to a Notion template to be able to get these workflow management systems that used to take us many, many, many months to build with custom software. So Notion's kind of the, democratizing content management is the way that I think of it.
I love this way of phrasing it. I would like the content management part in particular, because it makes things a little bit more haptic and sort of like have an intuitive understanding of it. I always say that I think the Notion's biggest contribution to the world of productivity software or workflow software is the democratization of databases, right? Like the fact that someone who's non-technical like me, right, lawyer background, never learned how to code or create apps. Actually, you can go in, create this database without knowing SQL and have just a sort of intuitive understanding over time, at least, of the magic that allows you to do. I mean, there might be some misconceptions, right? Might wonder why it looks like my spreadsheet but doesn't behave like it. Yeah. But in general, right, I think at the core the big thing that it brought to us.
Yeah. I think Notion is kind of in a sweet spot of providing a lot of abstraction such that we can access really complex stuff. And then in some cases, it actually gives us a lot of sort of go behinds to be able to add complexity to things. So that's when we get into our formulas and our automations and things like that. So it's kind of a nice balance in between allowing you to really quickly spin up conceptual stuff and modeling data and modeling workflows within an organization, for example. And then so your beginner users can use it in that sense, so they can be able to move things along workflows and things like that. And then your advanced users can go in and add more complexity, doing more data modeling and building those relational systems that typically a DB admin would have to do in an actual relational database, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think speaking of this, right, this learning journey in Notion, that's one of the things that I try to think a lot about, and I don't really have a great answer, but I have some sort of working hypothesis. But I feel like the learning journey of users in Notion is really important, and it's as you say, right, there's certain breakpoints where you go through and you start using it as a note-taking tool, and later you upgrade or upskill it maybe, right, to being this sort of system administrator. In your experience, right, teaching a lot of people how to use Notion, Do you see a pattern, right? Some sort of breakpoints or
Yeah.
aha moments that Notion people go through with Notion?
Sure. I think in general it's quite complex, and people come to different layers of the complicatedness of the software at different points. So somebody with a software background and a programming background would be able to really quickly jump into formulas, and that might be actually something that they pursue a lot of. People on the single player, I usually refer to like collaborative versus solo Notion use as single player, multiplayer. So people who've traditionally used Notion in single player mode won't have that kind of really robust understanding of how the collaborative aspects of the software works, what the permissions model looks like, and things like that. So it comes in different waves. So a lot of people go through the educational journey where they learn how to use Notion for themselves. And a lot of our students in Notion Mastery are this way, where they learn kind of the personal productivity and personal systems, and then they kind of upscale to doing the collaborative stuff. So they might come and learn how to use Notion for their personal systems, and then they would go back and introduce Notion to their team. And that might be where they go to the next level. In a very basic sense, I usually think of Notion education on 3 tiers. The base tier is sort of awareness. I'm going to bring these terms in from the terminology that I bring from firefighting, because like when we do like say hazardous materials operations or something, there's these 3 levels, which are awareness, operations, and then there's like a technician level, right? So at the awareness level, we're just like familiar with the tool and we understand kind of generally how it works, and we can use a complex system that's been built for us. At the sort of operations level, you're actually modifying these changes. So this might be an administrator in the workspace, somebody who's familiar with how databases work, how to create new properties, delete properties, maybe write some formulas and things like that. And at the highest level, like the technician level, that would be where we're actually thinking about overall workspace design and flow. So ins and outs of data coming into the workspace and flows of data going out of the workspace. And I usually call these 3 levels in Notion speak like a Notion user, so somebody who's just familiar with the software and how it works. And then there's like builders, and then you have the architect at the top. So like this is kind of like my 3 levels. And when we do team training, for example, we tend to do different tiered levels of training. So we might start by doing a awareness training. So here's how Notion works. Here's the sidebar. These are the favorites. This is how you, and then we walk them through maybe a pre-built situation. So a series of trainings around how to manage tasks, how to manage documents and things like that. So that's just like, they can use the system, right? And then we maybe do a smaller training where we're targeting the builders at the company. So people who are really, really, really like invested in Notion, they really love it, or they want to understand how it works. And so we might teach them the sort of like building fundamentals. So yeah, we start from there. And then there might be somebody who we're collaborating with one-on-one at that organization that's kind of the overseer of the Notion workspace. They're ultimately responsible as the workspace owner. And so that would be the architect, right?
Yeah, that's a really cool way of thinking about it. I love this, right? Like in particular, breaking it down into sort of the roles in the organization. Because what you mentioned earlier as well, right? Like usually the way Notion is rolled out in most organizations is this like a grassroots, like guerrilla movement that someone uses it personally and they're like, hey, this is more fun.
Right.
This looks like nicer than, whatever legacy software we use here. And let me just build something quickly. And then maybe 2 or 3 people see it, and it kind of works fine up until the moment when you need to turn it from this, shadow IT and hobby thing that some people use to track in single player mode in the organization stuff, to like oh shoot, this needs to work across the organization, across these 3 levels. There's a whole different challenge to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is typically why we kind of do these like slow build onboarding type things with the training, and we tend to build really, really rigid systems to begin with, where maybe only a handful of people at the organization can actually build new systems in Notion. The most fundamental mistake that almost all organizations make when adopting Notion starting out is building what I call a full access workspace. So everybody has full access to everything, and they dump the entire company in. And so the trainings that we develop are kind of like these procedural, like small little iterative wins, where our trainings and our builds tend to take quite a bit longer than most other people's. We're not giving you a template, for example. We don't give you everything all at once. I just refuse to do that at this point with my clients. So I might even just give you like Docs database, and you're going to learn how to use Docs database, and you guys are going to use this with one team for about a month and figure out how that works with one team. Like where are the friction points coming up? Who's struggling with the learning? Who needs to be trained up and that kind of thing. So it's like an observational phase that we look at the training and see how Notion is actually landing at the organization before we add maybe a second database and maybe a dashboard or two. So this idea, like one of the fundamental mistakes that most companies make is they grab the all-in-one template and they have no idea how to use it. And nobody in the team has used Notion before. And the CEO says, hey, everybody, we're using Notion now. And that's it. Right. So that's a really, really difficult thing to be placed in. It's a very, very complicated software. And so it's not as simple as something like Asana, where the experience of using Asana is the same for every organization. So if you go from Asana to Asana, you switch organizations, your training really applies here. So there's a difference between, the way the software works training, and then to the way that your company operates on the software. So there's like kind of two like tiers, and then within those tiers you've got the beginner, a medium, and advanced users as well. So it gets very, very complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a really underrated dimension with Notion, right? Where if you figure out how like the software works in Asana, you can still debate like sort of the soft skills of like, this is how we should work and this is how we should make use of the features. But by and large, right, they behave the way that we are taught to think about software. It's like that. There's a manual somewhere. The manual will tell me where to click and what to do, and then sort of like brings me through the workflow. And in Notion, you have like these additional dimensions, because first, right, it's like sort of very unopinionated, even if you have a template there. So you can branch out and like just doing this mindset shift, right, from here's a software that tells me exactly what to do, to here's a software where I can have my input, right, and I can customize it if I understand how to use the software to my workflow, and then figuring out what my workflow should be on the one hand. But also on the other hand, is like tool that is just in general more open. I could click somewhere that is the wrong place, right, and mess things up in a lot more meaningful ways than with a closed Asana tool. Yeah, that's always an interesting challenge when people first start using Notion.
That's right.
And maybe because you touched on it briefly with the way you currently work with clients, I would love to hear, right? Like I recently read an update from you that you sort of mostly stopped doing this done-for-you consulting, right? So this model where maybe someone comes to you, describes a problem, and you go off, build them a solution, hand them the keys, right? Do a training with them and say like, good luck, here you go. Could you maybe share a little bit about like, how do you currently approach consulting projects for people that might want to work with you?
For sure. And this is obviously evolving over time, as all consulting types of operations do. But I find that, at least I've been a consultant for well over 15 years. Before this, building more complex technical projects and mobile applications and things like that, and APIs for helping data move from here to there, websites and things like that. So there isn't really a whole lot of difference for me in terms of like the consulting aspect with Notion. It's like there's some kind of specification, there's some kind of desire to get from A to B, and you're being brought on to facilitate that transition to a new software, right? But what I find with Notion is that it's a little bit like getting the entire team to build their website together on the live server. So it's like you're not actually deploying a staging version of the application that gets like sort of a period of a small group of people using it, training and things like that. So I try to facilitate a similar interaction. And, as I mentioned before, it's kind of that thing where I'm just, noticing the difference between like a team that's just starting up with Notion. If I get them early on and we can sort of build and train at the same time iteratively, where we're just focusing on small little wins with the team and building what's really useful to them. Because I think a lot of consultants tend to, here's my all-in-one business template that has everything in it. And you're not, spending that, excuse me, that initial discovery period of figuring out like, what are the team's skills? How is the team communicating? Does it actually make sense to do all this stuff on Notion? Or is there a nice, combination of tools that Notion can act as the synthesis for this thing? So I find that in terms of like doing the consulting work, and I think I mentioned, to you that I had sort of moved away from doing the done for you stuff. I'm focused more on the advisory type role at this point. So I want to capture the attention of people as they're starting to adopt Notion. And I really like acting as a sort of a business coach in this mind. So like booking individual one-on-one calls or a suite of calls in order to advise the architect building the thing. And so that kind of, as a sort of shout out to what we're working on right now is we're building a program that will kind of act as the sort of DIY version of that, where we can have those touch points with the advisor as we go along. And I call that architecting workspaces. So it's basically like my services as a consultant. I'm designing that into a program that I can do sort of productized consulting with Notion, where I'm not doing the building, because the most successful Notion workspaces are designed by the people that are using them, because in the design of these programs, they get to understand how the software works, where its pitfalls are, and what they should and shouldn't be using the software for. Opening it up to the company slowly allows you to observe and get sort of insight into what people are using, what they're doing, what they're struggling with, and you can iterate and build over time. So like a good consultant can do that for a company, but like, honestly, I think that I'm not very good at that when it comes to, like, when I say I'm not very good at that, I mean, that's a full-time job. And Notion at scale, when you're operating your entire business on it, requires somebody to oversee and design and maintain it full time. And that's definitely a sticky opinion. It might be a bit of a take there, hot take. But I really think that, if you're doing your entire business operations on Notion, like there's going to be constant stuff that has to be thought about and designed and built and maintained. It is, because you can do anything, it also requires a lot of maintenance because you are doing everything. You're building your own systems. Those systems require maintenance and, workflow design, UX design, all these considerations. So I consider it a full-time role. And that's why I can't really time-wise devote to that many clients to be that person. Like I can only do 2 or 3 clients a month max. And even that would be like overwhelming for me, running the Notion Mastery program at the same time. So that's where we've moved to more of an advisory type coaching role.
Yeah, I love that. I think Notion architects will be like, or workspace architects, right? Architecting workspaces. Sorry, like I'll add the link for it in the description with the correct day. But I think this is a much needed program, like helping sort of like teaching the next generation, right, of system admins. Really, it's an interesting role because like in the past, right, like system admin used to be like a very technical role. Something, right, where you would look at the IT setup, and it's like probably programmers that do that, and you don't have a strong overlap with the day-to-day operations. And now with Notion, meaning that even non-technical people can do that, you move it into this cross-functional role where someone in the company has to do this like ops and like this layer of, okay, this is the mix of culture, right, of how we want to work, and the software that supports it. And I'm fully with you, right? Like in this, that's one of the disqualifying questions that we ask or that I ask in my discovery calls as well. Like, are you willing to at least have someone, at least in a part-time role, if it's a smaller company, right, or in bigger ones, full-time, have this title, this responsibility, right, and invest these resources continuously? Because Notion is definitely not like a set it, forget it, right, and then use it for the next 5 years system. That's a recipe for disaster.
It can be, but I think that's that initial, like, okay, we're going to test this out with a small little experiment. And I think you can get to say, like, we're managing our docs and maybe some like project stuff or like the team roles or something like that, or attentions or tasks, just keeping it really simple. That can be a set it and forget it thing. But when we get into that, like, we're now running the entire business on the thing with automations connecting with, whether it's a automation platform like Zapier, Make, Relay, something like that, you're getting into like a real technical role. I think the most successful engagements I've had where I was actually collaborating with somebody with a title that was chief of staff, director of operations, COO. So like the actual like operations lead is actually I'm helping them facilitate the new build. The places where Notion does not work is when the CEO goes, we're using Notion now, and they assign it to the CEO's executive assistant to take care of. Somebody who doesn't have operational experience. They can, some people can really grow into that role for sure, but it's a really tricky thing to do because Notion is like, it's like building websites. Like you have to have a little bit of user experience, system workflow design, change management is incredibly beneficial to know about when you're building workspaces, like, that kind of stuff. And just being able to have conversations with your team and talk about, like, one of my favorite questions that I like to start my consulting engagements is this kind of cheeky one, which is, who's going to resist this change the hardest? And there's always somebody that is like, this person, like they'll tell on the team, like, this person does not like change and blah blah blah. And so, like, I'll go to the where the friction points are, and I'll talk about, like, what's the friction point here, and maybe we solve for those things first before we even try to build in Notion. So it's kind of stuff like that, where being able to understand the organizational dynamics is really key for Notion consulting, for sure, because it's one of those softwares that is going to poke a bunch of different open wounds that you'll have as an organization. And I find that most of my consulting with Notion is usually like, the hard part is team dynamics. It's not building a Notion. Like, once you get to know Notion really well, you can really, really quickly build and iterate easy stuff. It's the training and the change management stuff that tends to be really difficult.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's very interesting that we have sort of like the opposite thing here, right? Like, if you talk about Notion users, it's about like, well, Notion as a tool has a very challenging learning curve, right? It's a complex software. It will take you a while to figure it out. But then when you look at the consulting side, right, it's like, well, that you understand that, right? In code, it would mean that you can write a syntax. That's a given, right? You don't even talk about it. You need to understand the tool in and out. Like, it's these other skills around it that make your services worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And to your point, right, with the teams, I always say, like, Notion is really like a sort of an impact multiplicator, right? So if you have messy systems internally and you don't fix them before or while you move to Notion, well, Notion will just take that, right, and amplify it, right? You have an even messier situation than before. Notion is not help you get more organized, right? It will help teams that know how to organize their work, help them, get their work done better, right? Like, remove friction points, like customize software in a way that you can't do with other points. But it's not a magic pill, right? That from yesterday to tomorrow makes your operational worries go away. Yeah,
it is a fascinating magnifier of those types of things. I sometimes see teams that will come to me for Notion help, and they'll be in the middle of a organizational reframe, like adopting a new framework for how they do work internally, and I'll answer their questions about Notion, but that's usually the point where I say, like, y'all are still figuring out how your company works. This is not really the time to adopt Notion. Sometimes Notion can be like sort of a helpful tool for organizing that work, but typically for people that have some Notion experience to begin with. So it's like almost like we're throwing multiple problems at the company to solve all at once. Like, how are we organized? How do we communicate? Like, how are we going to organize our work? What work are we doing? And then we're also going to try to train a 100-person organization on how to use a new tool, like, at the same time. And that's it's ambitious. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But
it is a challenge. Like, I also wouldn't say it can never work, right? Like, I've had projects, and they are really cool ones where when the whole team is bought into this, they know they're fighting several things at once, but there's this energy, right, moving towards it. Typically gets problematic, right, if the operational challenges more stem from the systematic. We are too overworked. We don't take the time to do these things. So now we just hope that that our mismatch in how we spend our energy goes away because we adopt a new tool. But maybe, like, speaking of your process, right, where you say, okay, you're moving more into an advisory role. You have like the more productized offering. But as a fellow consultant, I would be very interested in, like, hearing from you, like, how do you approach this, like, pricing challenge, right? If you say, okay, I'm going away from delivering more like a solution, right, where you can say, okay, at the end you'll be able to manage your projects XYZ, towards this, well, I'll be your advisor, right? Like, how do you price this? How do you help the client understand what, like, sort of budget that will involve, and deal overall with delivering a positive client experience in this tandem mode where you have probably less control, right, over the progress than you would otherwise
have. Yeah, I mean it's a really tricky thing to do. Yeah, value based pricing versus hourly based pricing, that kind of thing. So I think usually I have a different. It really depends on the team too, where I'll give them different like kind of pricing points and different packages based on that. But typically it's I have like sort of a standard. We either do like team trainings and stuff like that kind of have a fixed fee for a specific type of training. But usually it's like a monthly retainer type thing where they're paying for access to me and they basically get my calendar and they can book like as many calls as they want at a certain price point, right? So it's mostly just like advisory and I can come on and 90 minutes with a Notion expert. It can typically like I can build really quickly systems and things like that. And a lot of it is getting them to do it with me. So I really like that done with you rather than telling them what to do, like sort of asking them, what do we want to have happen here? And then I can show them an example and then they go and they sort of do their homework. And then the next time we meet, we might be reviewing what they built and I could sort of advise on that. So it's much more of like like sort of a trusted expert versus like, I'm going to do this for you. That way, when they're actually building it, they understand the fundamentals of how to use the tool and things like that. So a lot of times it's stuff like one of the biggest things that most teams miss is the me filter on users. And so a lot of times my first call will be like, all right, let's hook you up with a Teams database, and we're going to organize all your databases around Teams. We're going to build a self-referencing template inside of your team, so each team can have their own thing, and then you can spin up a new dashboard whenever you want for each team. And then there's going to be what I call a me page, which is like all of the company's resources brought into one page, and we usually set up the permissions for that such that that page is not modifiable except for the data in the linked views, right? So those two things, like Teams filters and then like a me page, it unlocks so much for the average organization, because then it's like, okay, so the training now is everybody goes to the me page. That's where they go. You go to your homepage. This is like an app for your company data, and all of the stuff related to the company is on this page, and it's all scoped to the user looking at it using the me filter, right? And that, like, most teams don't have a clue about me filters, the fact that you could bring linked databases into a dashboard. They don't know about permissions, so we go and we'll do a real quick bash and switch all of their permissions to can-edit content. So, okay, great. Now we've solved the accidentally backspacing and deleting your entire database system. Perfect. So like go just lock down the space basically. And so, yeah, that's the kind of stuff that like, with me, like you might end up spending a lot of money to get to a certain point because you're in a bad place or you're just starting out. But you might also spend $500 and like get like $100,000 in ROI from that hour and a half that you spend with me, because we're saving 100 team members an hour of a day, right, for a certain period of time. So it's really value based. So I charge a lot for an hour with me, but it's super valuable for a lot of, especially startups. I've had startups that are like, oh God, you just saved us like 150K like in that 90 minutes, or advise them on like how to integrate with their existing system. So how can, because I'm an engineer, this is kind of like my secret sauce as a Notion consultant. I can come in and be like, okay, cool. Like, tell me about how your API works. And I can tell them the quickest way to interface between Notion and their custom data already. And I can speak to their data sets. I can speak to SQL queries. Like, I have all of this existing knowledge from building apps that allows me to synthesize these two parts of businesses, right? So a little bit of everything there.
Yeah, I can imagine. I fully agree with you, right? Like I think we maybe can touch on like templates and the role in the Notion ecosystem a bit later. But that's the thing at the end of the day, right? Like you hire consultants because you have probably a team, right? Like you have a team of very talented and ambitious people. That if you look at the payroll cost for that, right, that's probably astronomical. And every minute, right, that people in your organization waste, particularly on a recurring basis, because the systems are not tuned, right, that multiplies like crazy. So you need these to fix these problems. And the point with Notion is, right, there are a lot of these fairly small changes that have a really, really high impact that you're never gonna find if you just, like work your way through it, right? Like it will take forever. I still remember, like I think like it was 2 or 3 years into working with Notion, where I don't even remember what it was. At some point, it was definitely also your tutorial right on the me pages, with the fact that linked views on pages have their own subsettings of sharing. Right? Like if you never click
That's
accidentally in that, like how are you gonna figure that out? And now this is standard practice, right, with all our builds as well. So yeah, can just attest that like time with you is very valuable. But maybe to that point, right? You said like mostly startups that work with you. If someone's listening to this, right, and say, okay, this Ben dude, he sounds really cool. I wanna work with him. Do you have a specific sort of typical client where you say these are the people that should reach out, or these are the people that I work with? Maybe you don't work with certain companies or individuals at all.
Yeah. I do have some hard no's. The hard no's are typically going to be anything in the crypto space, and I don't work with AI products. VC is usually like I have a very high bar for venture capital firms. So kind of those spaces that I'm not super excited to work with. I think personally, I think that Notion's sweet spot is between 25 and 100 members. Beyond that, I think that you need to start either breaking down organizations into multiple workspaces that are managed under multiple organizations, because you start to get too much differentiation between departments at that scale. And also it's just, it tends to be a really, really, like, you need multiple people managing the workspace. Sort of like each team is going to need a Notion expert. So it can be really tricky. And I think full well, my biggest gripe with Notion at least since 2021, when Better Databases shipped, is the limitations of the permissions model, in that you cannot create a scope for data within one database. So databases are always shared entirely with the user. You cannot filter that out, and there's no way around that. Many people have tried and done a number of hacky solutions that are usually defeated. But you can do this with third-party tools. Your Softer tutorial, for example, was fantastic. Tons of our students have really benefited from that one. But like at a certain point, like I tend to like think about like those. So I like the small to medium-sized business. And it usually is tech-savvy businesses, some kind of technical operating type thing. So a lot of startups and software companies and things like that.
Yeah, I just to stress this again, because I think it's like, it's not said enough. Like the permission issue is said enough, but like not the part that you cannot share a part of a Notion database view. As of the recording, but I'm more than happy to add like a big fat banner to this video afterwards, right? The subtitles when Notion releases granular permissions, but up until then, don't try it. Like it doesn't work natively in Notion.
Yeah, it's the thing. The permissions modeling is the thing that our students and every single one of my clients have run up against. That's the very first thing where it's like, wait, I can't. What? Like, how does this? And a couple companies have really solved this pretty interestingly. I think Fibery has a really cool model where the permission on the project, for example, you can share a individual project page with somebody, and you can set it such that any of the relations related to that project, say a task or a document, the permissions model kind of flows down through the child relations as well. So they'll get access to just the related pages in that database. So you don't have to expose your entire task database to every single member in order to share an individual project page with them, which means, like, in a sense that, like, right now, at least, maybe Notion changes this in the future, but right now, like, when somebody comes to me and says, I'm looking to manage my clients in Notion, that's usually where I'm like, no, I don't think actually Notion's a good fit for you right now. Like, it's great for managing an internal team and internal operations. Perfect. Right. But when we start doing, managing stuff with customers, vendors, where we have a concern where, if the vendors can see each other, there's like a thing, terms of services wise, you might be worried about exposing content to other people. Good example that I had this week from a student was they run a ghostwriting business. So they write copy and books and things like this for multiple clients, but those clients can't know about each other. So in order for them to manage those relationships in Notion, they have to create completely individual pages that have totally their own databases. So managing all of those vendors and clients is really, really, really difficult because you have to kind of click through to, if you had 20 clients, 20 different management pages, right? You can't see everything all in one place right now without third-party tools.
Yeah, I mean, I know you just mentioned, right, that you're not the biggest fan of crypto, but my metaphor is usually that the Notion has its own version of the blockchain dilemma, right? Where it's right now impossible to build like a secure, scalable, and properly separated workspace. But
yeah,
well,
I should note I should note that I have absolutely no issue with blockchain. I think they're great pieces of technology that are very useful for a lot of applications. I more specifically have a problem with cryptocurrency.
That is a very fair point. Yeah, very very good qualifier. Yeah, perfect. But now we're speaking of that. Maybe related to it. Maybe it's something completely different. I would love to hear what's your biggest pet peeve when it comes to and I use this in quotation marks, using Notion. Could be anything, right? From I don't know, weird ways of building it, like things that annoy you about the software. Just like when you look at Notion, the way people use it. Is there anything that triggers you other than the permission one?
Other than the permission one, no, more like I mean, I have a million pet peeves about every software that I use, but I think it's more of a workflow thing, and I think it's I think probably if I had to give an example of my biggest pet peeve would be financial management in Notion. And I think that this comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding and more a marketing thing that I think early Notion did, where they said it replaces Google Sheets. So I think probably my biggest pet peeve is people trying to do stuff that is really, really suited for spreadsheets in Notion. So Notion's table view looks a lot like a spreadsheet, functions a lot like a spreadsheet, but it doesn't work anything like a spreadsheet. It's not a spreadsheet, right? So the idea of building something that requires a lot of calculation and aggregation in Notion requires that we have relations for every single aggregate that we want to calculate, apart from, calculate at the bottom of the table or something like that. So I think that's probably my biggest pet peeve is financial management, because because you're building it yourself, you're managing it yourself, you're writing the formulas yourself. Mistakes are going to happen, right? And so if you're doing some kind of bookkeeping, taxation, that kind of stuff, you have a real high possibility for making a mistake that could cost you money. For some people, this is okay. Like if you're just doing general kind of like a ledger, it's fine. But I find that, I think it's, you should use bookkeeping software for bookkeeping, there's, if assuming the cost is affordable to you, like a business doing bookkeeping in Notion, I think is kind of a waste of management time and build time, where you're going to save a lot more money by paying the monthly cost of bookkeeping software.
Yeah, I think that's a very true lesson for a lot of things in Notion, right? The fact that you could build anything in Notion, that doesn't mean you should. Like the promise of an all-in-one tool is very alluring, and I love that you can centralize a lot of functions in Notion. But particularly if you're a business, right, that reaches a certain critical mass, that's not going to work, right? You'll migrate away from an all-in-one solution to something where Notion might be in the center of it, right? Like sort of a hub and spoke model. But you need dedicated software for specific jobs, bookkeeping being one of them. Sometimes CRM solutions are definitely a lot of workplaces, right? Like in some sense, Notion is really for me often the tool where the meta work happens, right? The collaboration, and then you still need your specialized tools to go into to do your job. You just want to make sure that the information sort of flows back to the rest of the company through Notion.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Notion, has changed a lot over the years, right? And I think you and Marie, you've been sort of at the forefront of Notion education since day one. So would be very curious to hear whether your approach to teaching Notion has significantly changed over the years, or it's more like, well, the landscape shifts, but actually the sort of lessons are timeless.
I would say no, because the lessons are not timeless, and it's been 2 years now, I think, since we made this move to a more sort of what I would call on-demand training. So we don't really plan out trainings in advance anymore. We don't have a release schedule. I have personally I know that you tend to get things out right when the feature ships, and these marketing embargoes that we often have, you're tending to get out feature stuff right away, and I think there's usually a rush to do all of the training right away and showcase all the features, and there's a super huge benefit to that, and I love that you exist because I can point people to that and be like, yeah, like you can know about everything coming out. But over time, we've kind of adopted this like wait and see type of methodology. So I usually sit with the new features for about a month before I start talking about them, because and this is maybe just my special sauce, but I tend to notice where and I wrote this very kind of popular tweet a long time ago where I was like talking about the Notion hype cycle, where when features release, everybody in the Notion game is like, this is a game changer. And then about 2 weeks later, they go, wait, it doesn't do this. And then 2 weeks after that, they're like really angry that it doesn't do this. And then it's like, I can't believe Notion did this. Like, why are they doing this to my family? Like, I can't believe they betrayed us like this. That's the Notion hype cycle, because they ship really fast and they ship like kind of experimental stuff, and then they go back and they clean things up sometimes. So we stopped so much like trying to plan for that, because we know that Notion is going to change. We know that Notion's design team changes the interface every 2 days or so. Like there's something different. So like the idea of screenshotting and capturing a fixed set of knowledge on how to use Notion is very, very difficult. And we have, tens of thousands of pages of training at this point. There's absolutely no way, even with a team of like 100 people, we could keep up to date. So we sort of leaned into that. And now the idea is that when a thing comes out, I tend to do these things called demo days, where I will do a live build for like 2 hours. And I will have a list of all of the features that come out, and we will do a live build from scratch using all of those features. And so we do that well after the feature has been released, so that I have and this is what people pay us for when they join Notion Mastery, is to know when things don't work, what to expect, how to design with it, like the best way to do it. So like sort of like good and best practices type stuff. And then every quarter we do a training that is like the workflow related stuff. So in the last year or so, we've done trainings on capacity management, so capacity planning. And Notion is kind of a backdrop to that, but we'll talk about how to think about how much stuff you have on the go and how to plan your life and things like that. So we get a little bit more into the workflow management training stuff. We have a really popular course now called Principles of Dashboarding that teaches people basically from scratch how to build really, really functional dashboards that are really shareable and really maintainable. And we have all these different like starting points and principles and good and best practices from that. So that's kind of how we've evolved over the years, from doing these early trainings to we do more like retroactive stuff, right? The assumption is that Notion is going to be changing every week. There's something different to know and notice. And so we just like, for that stuff, I just dump that into Blue Sky. I dump that into our forums and say, hey, check this out. This is neat. And then people will have a discussion about that in our forums. And, my videos, what my videos look like. It's always like, I'm always doing something that like nobody seems to be talking about, but I'm like, why is this broken? What is this? And like kind of working around that. And I get like maybe 10 people that are like, oh my God, this is so helpful. I ran into this, but that's kind of the stuff that I notice and the stuff that I care about. So it's more of, that's how our training has evolved. It's a lot more like on the fly. So, at this point you can just drop me into a totally blank space with 100 people and I can do a training. Like it doesn't, what do you guys want to learn about? Like what are you struggling with? And so our training is very like on demand. So we have weekly office hours that people just come and say like, hey, am I crazy? Is this working properly? Or we'll live build formulas. We'll live build systems for people, dashboards, management, stuff like that. And it's just like an open format training type thing. So we've gotten very used to whatever the market is demanding from us, we'll do trainings on basically,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, particularly because like staying on top of Notion, right? It is a full-time job, and very few people can afford to spend as much time as we do, right? Like thinking about the software and trying it out and like finding all the little weird quirks. So the going from, well, all these things, here's everything that's different and what it might mean for your business? Two, well, this is like, actually the questions that you need to solve. I think charts is a great example. I think like charts in Notion it's a great feature. Of course, like if you think about it in abstract, charts should be present in a tool that, has databases. Would I, as a product manager in Notion, have built this? Probably not, right? I would have like put 99% of capacity on on permissions, but because like the actual workflows of charts, they are nice, they're super helpful. I've seen tons of cool builds where we have them, but it doesn't open a different magnitude of things, right, that you can do with them.
Yeah.
And there's some features, not a lot, that are then the real game changers, and then there are the other game changers that just make people like me very excited to talk about them, but are probably the day-to-day impact, not the biggest ones.
That's right.
Speaking of Notion mastery, though, maybe like that's the course I always point everyone to, right? Whenever they ask me, like I want to learn Notion and I need something structured. I don't want to, like spend hours. Like my first suggestion is like, use the tool, like, run into walls, Google around. Like there's not really any way around it other to learning the software and using it. But if you want to know like structured guidance and support, like Notion Mastery is definitely the place to go. Who would you say should join Notion Mastery? Like who is this course and program for?
Oh, I think it's for people who we have a very large community of people who are what you would maybe describe as neurodivergent, and I think that comes from myself being neurodivergent, Marie having ADHD. We are a family of people on the spectrum, and so this like we tend to get a lot of people who are sort of in discordance with their workflow. They're over capacity. They are unable to do the things that they think they should be doing. And so our course is basically designed in like teaching you how to use Notion, but at the same time, it's like sort of, we have a bit of a Trojan horse type thing where we're teaching you like workflow mastery as well. And so it's people that are trying to organize something. It doesn't matter if it's like yourself or your business. So I think folks in the neurodivergent slice of life tend to find us really readily, and we kind of pride ourselves on you say it's structured, and we do have a structured, like we have a track journey. Basically, there's like 3 levels of tracks where you go through like the Notion fundamentals, and then you're building your dashboards, and then we have like a Zen Master Notion level, which is like building some very advanced stuff. And then we have a series of probably 100, 200 live trainings, and then our weekly office hours as well. So a lot of people join the course not because they want to learn Notion, but because they want to stay on top of the constant deluge of changes, right? And so every week we're talking about what's new, what's different, like what are you noticing? What are the patterns that are evolving? And so we usually build trainings that are like stuff like Notion design patterns. So instead of teaching, here's the plus button, that's what this does, we actually teach about Notion's design language and sort of like what you should expect when you see certain experiences. So we talk about kind of like the higher level design stuff as well as this type of stuff. So mostly it's people who want to learn Notion, but a lot of times it's like, there's just too much going on in this space, like, or they want to learn they're specifically good at Notion, but they come into maybe one of our mini courses, like my Formula Fundamentals course is a good example. They come in to learn formulas, and then they sort of upsell from there to the larger program, because Notion Mastery gives you access to sort of like every week you could come and say, here's a formula that I'm working on, it's not working, can you help me fix this, Ben? And I'll be like, yeah, here's how that works. So it's a community type thing. I think being in a space where everybody's kind of right at the tip of the technical edge, and being able to be able to talk to us and keep the conversation going. So a lot of people sign up for our membership once they finish the initial program, just to stay up to date with what's going on and be able to ask questions when they get stuck. So we have a lot of businesses that basically pay us, it's like $79 a quarter for our membership program. It's pretty affordable. And so they basically get group coaching for a couple bucks a month for their organization. So it's, we get everybody from, students to Fortune 500 employees.
Yeah, that's particularly for the businesses. That's probably the most affordable mastermind that they are part of. So that's a great deal.
Yeah.
I think that might be also like we're nearly coming up to the hour, and I really appreciate you, taking the time to answer all these questions. I could go on for another 2 or 3 hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. So maybe just like, as we're going to an end, that would be a good point maybe to touch on, digital permaculture, something that you mentioned right ahead of the conversation, and something that is like very present in your work. Could you maybe explain me briefly, like what is it, like how does it influence what you do? And
yeah. So this is kind of where Marie and I have a lot of crossover when it comes to the Notion side of things, and digital permaculture is kind of the topic that we're exploring as we move past Notion. So we're doing the Notion stuff, but also we wanted to move into something that was like uniquely our thinking. And so the two of us are working on a book tentatively called Productive by Nature. And it talks about this concept of permaculture in digital systems. And permaculture is basically like sustainable human systems. You can think of permaculture as like those farms where they're taking some waste from the animal and they're moving it to like, over here to fertilize these crops. And then those crops go here. So everything's interrelated and interconnected. And so we did a talk recently at the Second Brain Summit, which is Tiago's Building a Second Brain conference in Los Angeles. And we talked about this concept of digital permaculture. And so it's sort of woven throughout all of our trainings. And that it comes up in the capacity planning and the stuff around building observable systems that allow you to sort of move through your life and make like sort of more educated trainings and notice where the edges are between certain things. So a lot of people that work in Notion, for example, tend to wear multiple hats, I think. And going back to the ADHDers, I have very, very varied interests. So for myself, like I move through my workspace and I do music production, and then I do firefighting, and then I do this. And, we can build these sort of like baseline systems and then on top of that, we can layer different aspects of our lives. Permaculture has this concept of zone and sector analysis. And so we're like thinking about how we can apply these things to doing analyses of ourselves and building really observable systems such that we can gather insight and make changes like iteratively. So small, tiny changes, that's a big permaculture principle as well. So that's kind of where we're moving next, is some kind of book, or I really want to build some kind of software for sort of visualizing all of this stuff. And then maybe like, connecting that with Notion to be able to like actually seed the data. So that's kind of our next venture, is something in that space of permaculture and how it applies to digital systems.
That sounds fascinating. If you need any, like not proofreaders, but I don't know what they call, but like any, like people that read your book, let me know whether in the beginning or what's it sound like. Really, really, can't wait to get my hands on that one.
Awesome.
But yeah, amazing. I think that's pretty much it. Maybe just to, like to finish us off, you want to like tell us quickly what's the favorite thing that you've built in Ocean? Or maybe like one of the favorite things where it just, might not be the build with the biggest ROI for a company, but it's just so incredibly fun. What would it be?
I've got a couple things that I usually share when people ask me, like, what's, a Reddit post or something, like what's the most interesting thing you built in Notion? So a couple examples. The first would be my duty crew management system that I built in Notion for my fire department. So our fire department has 5 duty crews, and they split the firefighters over these crews with one officer leading each crew. And we have a kind of cycle where, you're on duty every 5 days or something like that. And so I built a system in Notion that via a select object, I can move people around to the different groups. And then I have a automation which figures out which duty crew is on schedule, pulls that data from Notion, and it sends text messages and Slack messages to those members. And they can respond with a thumbs up or a thumbs down whether they're available for duty. And then at a certain point during the day, I also have another automation that runs, and it sends another message to the officer on duty and says how many people they have available for duty. Because the duty crews it's all volunteer based. We try to be available for duty, but sometimes people have to be out of town or whatever. And so like all those things then get pushed back to a Notion database that kind of keeps track of like the when people said yes or no and things like that. So it's like a pretty robust connection between Slack and Notion, and a couple services, Twilio and stuff for sending text messages. So that kind of thing is pretty cool. I've done a couple features in that space, like our whole fire department. I manage all of our like burn permits and things like that on there. So our chief, our deputy chief can log in and upload those, and then everybody can see like which burn permits are available. So that's something that helps me when I'm, say, responding and I'm in the officer seat. I can load up Notion real quick and be like, oh, we got a burn complaint at this address. Let's have a look at our burn permits and see, is there a valid permit for this address? And then we might say like, cancel that call or something like that if that's available. The other thing I'm really proud of is our membership management system for Notion Mastery. We have one of the cooler things, and I wrote a blog about this, but we use Notion Skim API, which is allows you to add members, provision members, and add them to groups via the Notion API. So when somebody makes a purchase on our website, we have a series of automations that run that, add them to the correct group based on which course they bought. And then we do the permissions modeling such that they get access to certain team spaces based on which course they purchased. And then that gets all fed into our company workspace where we can actually manage the membership and things like that. So we have all the information about the Stripe, their subscription with ConvertKit, and so on and so forth. So I can go into our membership management portal and I can, if somebody's like, please cancel my membership, I can mark it as cancel. It'll automatically schedule that to be canceled. It will remove them from certain ConvertKit things and stuff like that. So, you can get pretty wild with some of these dashboards. I think I showed that dashboard to the Notion team about a year ago, and I think their minds were kind of blown what we were building with with just basic databases and automations. And now we have webhooks, workspace webhooks, so I'm able to do a lot more. Building a syncing Google Calendar system is a lot easier now because now we can actually respond to pages being deleted in Notion and unschedule those events in Google. So stuff like that is the kind of stuff that I really like to build in Notion.
Yeah, I mean, I can only like agree. This is the most fun part. And I think this is like for anyone listening to this, rather than like being frustrated about certain things that you can't build in Notion. It's like the answer is usually to like look beyond, right? Like just because it's not possible natively in Notion doesn't mean that Notion can't be an important puzzle piece there, right? Sure, Notion can't send text messages, but just integrate it right with the service. So like I would say like the next level after being a system administrator and like architecting Notion workspaces is then to look, okay, like how does Notion fit in the larger ecosystem of my apps. And just the fact, right, again, we come full circle that we have simple databases that we can shape and where we can have some nice simple UI on top of it. The fact that we can spin it up quickly and then integrate with other existing services is like everything's possible.
Yeah, if I think of like the big time Notion education, journey, it's like, learning the basics of Notion. And then if you're going to work with teams, it's then discovering a bit about the permissions. And then you can work with formulas. And I think really discovering what you can do with formulas, if you've never written any code before, leveraging something like formulas where you can kind of like click the elements that you want and it can add them to your database and you can kind of see the result in real time. We've had students that have gone through our formulas course and then gone on to start learning a little bit of JavaScript because Notion's formulas language Notion is written in JavaScript. A lot of it is, some of the back end probably not, but a lot of it, the front end is all JavaScript. And so the formulas language is actually similar. And so a lot of people will understand some of the fundamental concepts of programming after our course and then go on to go figure out some JavaScript stuff and start doing automations. So like the automations is kind of like the next phase, but there's a lot with automations you can do without any kind of programming knowledge. But that to me would be like the super ideal if you really want to like cover the entirety of the Notion sort of ecosystem. At this point, it's probably more than anybody can know to know everything about Notion. There's definitely aspects of Notion that like when a student is like, how does this work? And I'm like, I've never seen that before. Let's go check it out. Because it's big enough now that you can't really learn Notion entirely. And that's why I talk about Notion mastery as being sort of a comfortableness with the discomfort that you're not going to know anything, and being able to move fluidly through that space. And so understanding Notion patterns and design primitives is really, really beneficial, because every time you log in, you're going to see something new that you hadn't experienced before. And if you know how to think in Notion, then you can kind of move quickly through that and try to figure out what the design team was sort of intending with a sort of feature. I think at this point, I've worked in Notion long enough that I can kind of sometimes understand, I could even say which employee designed with which feature, because I know who works on what teams, and so I can be like, hey, did you work on this? And sometimes be right. So yeah.
Yeah, there's certain tells, but I think that's the perfect way to end, this conversation. Being comfortable with the fact that Notion is ever changing, and then you'll never be now I've figured out all the tools, and more being able to navigate this and make the most of it in any given moment. So thank you so much, Ben. This was amazing. Really appreciated you taking the time. This was a great conversation, and I hope to do a round 2 sometime soon. Now, before we finish it up, we drop it all also below, but if someone wants to, go immediately and check you out in one specific place or in 2 places, where should they go? What should they type in the browser?
Yeah, notionmastery.com is our primary website. Under the Learn dropdown, you'll find all of our programs. So we have the Notion Mastery, that's kind of our flagship program, where you can join for a year, and that gives you, monthly and weekly access to us live. And so I can help you with certain stuff, and we have a community and a forum and stuff. And then there's also some sub courses in there, like that Principles of Dashboarding workshop. I definitely recommend that one for people who are starting to move towards managing team workspaces with Notion. Kind of goes over the fundamentals and permission building and work and that kind of stuff. Formula Fundamentals is there. And then my new program, which I'm working on now, is architectingworkspaces.com, and you can find that under the Learn dropdown as well. That's just a kind of email capture page. So if you want to go and sign up for that, I'll let you know when that's close to being done.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, and hope to talk soon.
Thank you. Awesome.
So much for my conversation with Ben. Now, if this got you all excited and you want to hear more, behind the scenes content from the Notion ecoverse, well, I've got you covered. I have a whole podcast of interviews with cool people that build with Notion, or with the people that actually build at Notion. For example, my interview with Notion's co-founder Akshay Kothari that you can check out here. It's great, and will give you a sneak peek about the things that Notion is planning to do in the future. Again, just click here, and I will see you in a second.